with what we vaguely call modernity. And when I always throw around this word modernity, what am I even talking about, right? I'm always throwing this word around. But that's where we have to begin. We have to begin with the recognition that there was some threshold, some type of singularity in history that fundamentally changed everything. And how to define it is super tough. But in my view, that's the object of Marxism. What is modernity? Marxism is answering that question, in my view. Like, what fucking happened? You know what I mean? Can you define how you're using modernity? It's so hard, isn't it? It's really hard to define. It's super hard to define what that is, you know? But it's like we know what we mean when we say it, though. It's so hard to define and simplify, but it's like we all know what we're talking about when we say it. We're talking about some fundamental negation, some fundamental threshold that completely changes how we, humanity, relates to being. Okay? It's this complete leveling, this complete emptying of the determinate content of humanity into some kind of blind negativity, negation. Modernity can be thought as two things. It can be thought as the Anglo-Saxon object, the substance. Let me put it this way, right? Let me put it this way. Somewhere along, through the course of history, specifically the history of Europe, Europe encountered something that was for it impossible. Something that could have never been expected, something that was unacceptable, that it couldn't accept, that it had to deny. Think about the discovery that the earth revolved around the sun. That's just fucking shattering. Before we thought we were living in some harmonious system, cosmos, and it made sense in some type of way. And then we discover something that completely humiliates our pre-existing sense of meaning. How do you fucking make sense of that? But in my view, Anglo-Saxon metaphysics dwells in this negation. It absolutizes this moment of the negation and says that alienation we experience, for example, in the experience of scientific, the results of scientific work or whatever, scientific intervention of reality, that is all being is. It is that negation. It is that alienness. Something is true and real only insofar as it is estranged and alien from us. To the extent that things are familiar to us and human and meaningful, they are not real. They're deceptive. That's Anglo-Saxon metaphysics at the end of the day. And what I'm saying now sounds crazy, but when you actually think about this, it makes a lot of fucking sense. For example, think about the obsession with facts in our society. Fact-checking and evidence-based, socialism done cucked, socialism done left bullshit. Our feeling and our human meaning is not something real. The only real thing is what somehow humiliates our human inner feeling, if you want. Like what we didn't expect to be true, right? Like, for example, because we cannot preemptively account for or predict what the void is going to give back to us. When we investigate the cosmos, what we're going to discover and what that's going to do in terms of our pre-existing world of meaning. Because of that, to me, Anglo-Saxon metaphysics absolutizes that moment of alienation as the only true thing. But to me, there's another path to enlightenment than the European kind. There's another path to modernity than the European kind. Because we're talking about the same things here. Okay? No, my greatest intellectual force is... No, because my thing is precisely about the negation of the negation. Okay? Jake, that's a really big assumption you're making. I only stress the negation just so I can establish some common ground of meaning with you guys. Because I want that to tick something in your heads. When I'm talking about the negation, I want that to evoke something for you guys. The best example of this is, let's say you were in a debate with someone and you thought something was true. And then they brought up a fact which completely was the opposite of what you thought. The question as a human being is this: how do I make that meaningful? How do I make that meaningful? Because to me, my sense of meaning was bounded up with some type of assumption about its phenomenal or empirical content. And once that content is shown to be in contradiction with my pre-existing one, how do I redeem my sense of meaning? Okay? The Anglo-Saxon aesthetic or metaphysics discovers in this alienation a sense of meaning that can only be defined by the consistency of this alienation. Something is meaningful only insofar as it is estranged from us in this way. We arrive at the moment of meaningfulness, when we arrive within the Anglo-Saxon sphere, when we arrive at this moment that we're somehow humiliated. Past the negation as a double negation, though. Negation of the negation is positive being. Because, Jake, the reason there's a negation of negation is because we are delivered to an object of some kind. We are delivered to positive being in a way that we were not familiar with before. There's only a negation of the negation because we're brought outside of that contradiction. We're brought to something, for example, in the case of Marx, that can't be contained within philosophy. Marx's negation of the negation was the discovery of the proletariat. Okay? But the meaning of the proletariat, the way in which the proletariat becomes meaningful for us, cannot be re-domesticated into philosophy. Instead, the proletariat can only become meaningful for us within the sphere of a higher form of practice intervention into the world, which for Marx was the class struggle and our political relation to it thereof. It's Bolshevism. Instead of philosophizing, the Bolsheviks created a party, for example. This is all outside of philosophy. So philosophy's negation of the negation led it to a place fundamentally outside of philosophy, but which nonetheless reconciled what philosophy was and what it was aiming at this whole time. Okay? The negation of the negation means that positive being was too big for us in the beginning. What positive being is, basically this is what it means. What we experience as the transcendental humiliation of an alienation or a negation was just a moment in a larger positive being. Why am I fucking obsessed with kaiju, Godzilla, King Kong, and all that bullshit? Why am I fucking obsessed with it? Because for me, kaiju has a special conceptual relevance. Kaiju means that even though it's some kind of consistent thing, it's a fucking monster. There's a deeper harmony that defines this as a being. Godzilla is fucking Godzilla. He's got a tail, he's got a head. It's an actual monster, it's an actual thing, right? But from our narrow individual perspective, when he's shaking the ground, we just experience it as some kind of chaos or some kind of disturbance into our world. But that disturbance is just one moment in some type of higher being that we're just too small to see. To me, the Marxist type of enlightenment is an acceptance of our finitude, an acceptance of our smallness. We come to a point where we accept. We don't only accept it though. The way in which we accept it is determinate. For example, in every revolutionary moment, like in the Maoist Cultural Revolution, waving those little red books was a form of acceptance. It was saying, here is our finitude. Here is what we are. Here is our limit. But you stand by your limit. You fight and die for your limit. So, it's much more subtle than traditionalistic. And by traditionalistic, I mean the traditionalist school of those people like René Guénon and all those types of people, the right-wing type of people. It's much more subtle than the traditional critique of modernity. It redeems the modern negation as a moment in something bigger, something more fundamental.